I can tell you details about mom. I can smell the cigarettes. I can smell the vodka. I can tell you details upon details upon details and how my mother touched me inappropriately as a young boy. How do I save my marriage? How do I not traumatize my kids? How do I deal with these feelings of filthiness and disgustingness whenever my little daughter wants to sit on my lap, right? Or my wife wants to hold my hand? What do I do with that? After I tried to commit suicide 10 days later, it was actually 7 days later, my wife took my 4 kids and she left me. Now, she didn't leave me because I tried to commit suicide. It's not what she left me. She left me because I had her on this emotional roller coaster of I want you, I hate you, I love you, I don't love you, leave me, don't leave me, divorce me, no, stay with me. I was back and forth. I was so fragmented internally that I was expressing that externally. When women are done, this is what I found about women. Women have a very, very long runway. Very long runway. But that runway does eventually run out.
Mm-hmm.
And when that runway runs out, you are done. Like, it takes an act of God to get them back. And in that time, I asked myself the question, what is it that I'm not doing? What I wasn't doing is I wasn't working through the way I felt towards what was done to me. People tend to be like, well, I feel this way all the time. I feel depressed and I feel anxious and I feel this and I feel this all the time. And I won't deny that, right? I won't deny it. What I will debate people on is most people, what they do is they live with their pain. They never deal with their pain. And living with it and dealing with it are two different things.
I'm hearing you say identifying feelings and working through those feelings and
Yes.
and all that is a part of it. But I want to kind of get into even more details about what that means, because on the other end of it, it's like if you're all feelings, then all of a sudden, you can quickly get into a space where you lose reality.
There is purpose through the pain.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, unfortunately, is we want to skirt around it. We want to go around it. We want to blame it. We want to justify it. We want to medicate it. We want to label it. So how do you find the will for your life? How do you find purpose? How do you do that? You have to go through the pain of life. You have to go through it. Some people hold themselves hostage to themselves. Right? And that was one of the biggest things that I had to work through for myself, right? A lot of my pain was self-inflicted. Right? And so I had to kind of work through the element of forgiving myself. So I had to work through the element of forgiveness, because forgiveness is one of the biggest anchors in people's lives.
Practicality wise, how are you doing that? Like how are you forgiving? So for the person that's listening and they're like, that sounds amazing, but how do I do it? The Patina'd podcast is about the earned wisdom found in pain. It's about chasing failure, catching it, and using that as an opportunity. It's about scar tissue and sinew. It's about stretch marks and dented fenders and refusing to hide them. It's about pushing our insecurities and shame to the forefront instead of behind us. Instead of seeing rust as something that compromises a structure's integrity, we choose to see it as the grit that builds character. This is the Patina'd podcast. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Patina'd podcast. So today I have my guest with me, Ryan Light, and I'm excited to do this one. This is our second go at it, and so the first one didn't go so well, but so far the recording of this is going much better. So we're both hoping and praying that it's going to continue down this road, especially for the listeners of this podcast, because I'm excited to hear some of the insights you got, Ryan. And so I'll do a quick little intro of you.
Yeah, perfect.
And then, we'll get rolling. So Ryan Light is a coach of the Feel to Heal method. He's specializing in anxiety and depression. And he's the founder of beatanxiety.me, which is also your Instagram handle and page, where a lot of people follow you on there. And you're also a veteran, which is cool.
Yes.
So we might get into some of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
so,
man.
Yeah, I was in the Army in the early 90s, so yes.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the Patina'd podcast, dude. I'm
Well, I
glad to have
appreciate
you
you. I
on.
appreciate you having me. Hopefully, this time around, we'll dive into this. Won't have any technical difficulties. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, well, you already taught me something about the just now about how we can do the screen, so I don't have to see both of us.
Right. So, I mean, I'm a good looking guy, but I don't like to look at myself that much. I might get full of myself then.
Yeah, it's distracting. It's
It's totally
distracting. You see
distracting. Yeah.
yourself and you're like, I don't know. Like for me, I'm like, is my mustache all
Right.
jacked up? Dang it. And now I just
Right.
lost track of what you said.
Right. The
Yeah.
beard is the beard is a little bit more green than I thought it was. Right. It's a little glistening. So yeah, I get it totally.
Yeah, man. Well, so I usually how I like to go about this, I got a therapy background, and so I tend to like to go into the backstory of the guest first, childhood, upbringing, all that kind of stuff.
Got it. Well, again, I appreciate you having me here. And, yeah. So I always tell people when they first start working with me, my content, from a social media perspective, my content resonates with a lot of people because I typically tell them I get you because I was you, right? So I'm 30 years into this struggle, 20 of those years of unhealthy coping mechanisms with distraction and medicating and drinking and isolating and fighting and arguing and complaining and justifying and labeling and you name it, I went to go do it. Back in 2011, I almost committed suicide. And what birthed that place for me was a place of getting real with myself around the 20 years of I was in therapy, I was counseling, I was psychologist, psychiatrist. I was trying to do the work, right? It wasn't as though I wasn't trying to do the work. I was trying to do the work, but I just didn't hit rock bottom yet, right? To kind of dig myself out from the hole I created. I always tell people what they don't what the little backstory with me is after I tried to commit suicide 10 days later, it was actually 7 days later, my wife took my 4 kids and she left me.
Mm.
Now, she didn't leave me because I tried to commit suicide. It's not what she left me. She left me because I had her on this emotional roller coaster of I want you, I hate you, I love you, I don't love you, leave me, don't leave me, divorce me, no, stay with me. I was back and forth. I was so fragmented internally that I was expressing that externally, right? And typically my wife and my kids got the brunt of those frustrations. I was feeling anxiety. I was feeling depressed. I was having anxious thoughts. I was having intrusive thoughts. I had all of this stuff coming at me that I would talk. And I told my wife for years, how come you don't get me? How come you don't understand me? How come you don't get me? How come you don't understand me? In reality, I really wanted her to save me, right?
Mm.
That's what I really wanted from her. And since she couldn't save me, that meant she was against me. And now that you're against me, now you're going to feel the wrath of me. Right. So interesting enough, there is a happily ever after story with us. We did eventually reconcile. We were separated for almost 2 years. We separated for 2 years. It took another 3 years to heal the marriage. I'm originally from New York City, so I grew up in New York City, in Queens. I moved out to Seattle. I joined the Army in 1990, and I didn't join the Army because I wanted to, so to say. Right. I joined the Army for a couple of reasons. First of all, being in the kind of Northeast in that time frame, the culture was, you're 18, get your ass out the door.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't know what you're doing, but you ain't going to be doing it here. Right. So go right. So I had that kind of cultural thing going on. And plus, to be frank with you, due to the growing up with addiction and alcoholism, and I had a stepfather who was in the mafia. So seeing that dynamic, growing up in that kind of society and that culture, I wasn't Italian. I'm Irish. Well, actually, we can go into that story as well. I found out some skeletons when you take DNA tests. You find out a bunch of stuff, boy, that brings stuff up big time. Good thing I worked through my stuff, because what it brought up would have set me on a trail to know tomorrow. But essentially, I joined the Army to get out of my situation. I call it the best mistake of my life. I joined the Army in 1990. I went out to California. I was in Fort Ord, California for 3 years. During the Desert Storm, we were a light infantry unit, specialized in repelling and helicopter deployments. So I was a rode Blackhawks and those types of things, aerosol kind of stuff. But so we just came back from Panama. My unit just came back from Panama with Noriega. So if in the first Gulf War, if we would have, if Bush Senior would have went more up north, we definitely would have been there. But respectively and greatly, gracefully, I didn't have to go, right? I didn't have to go to Desert Storm. So 3 years in the Army, went up to Seattle, moved up to Fort Lewis. If you're familiar with Fort Lewis, moved up to Fort Lewis for about a year, spent a year up there, essentially hated the military, to be honest with you, right? Couldn't stand it, hated it. Again, it was the best mistake of my life. While you're in the military, you can't, you're like, what am I doing here? When you got out of the military, I mean, the best friends, the best time of my life, the best brotherhood, best everything. I actually missed it when I got out. So after that, I got out of the military, and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with myself, right? Like, what am I going to do? I was kind of a bit apprehensive. I went back home. I went back to New York after I got out. And I remember I told people a story around where I remember driving over to George Washington Bridge off of 95. Right? I remember driving over to George Washington Bridge and seeing the skyline of the city. Right? I remember seeing the skyline of the city. And I'm like, what in the world am I doing? Like, I spent 18 years in this flipping hellhole. Right. And now I'm going to come back to this. Right. So, and I'm like, well, it's kind of like it's this addictive things are going to be different kind of approach. Right. Like everything's going to be different. It's been 4 years. Life's going to be great. Families all healed. Everybody's the same. Right. Everybody's going right. And that was just it. It was the exact same. And so I stayed there for about a year. One day I woke up. I said, today's the day. Packed my little car up, my little Nissan Sentra, packed my car up, and off I went. Didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I was not going to stay there. And so I got in my car, started driving away, and Teen Spirit came on. If you remember Nirvana's kind of first hit song, Teen Spirit. So Teen Spirit came on, and I said, you know what? I'll just go back to Seattle. That's what I'll do. So I'm driving my car. I mean, it's how I make split life decisions, right? Split life decisions. I get back in my car. I go through Georgia, where I live today. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I didn't mention that. So I live in Atlanta, Georgia. We did move from Seattle. My wife and my family did move from Seattle. But I remember kind of driving from New York, came down to Georgia to see my brother, went over to Dallas, had a friend in Dallas. When I was making my way to California, and then I was going to go back up to Seattle. So ultimately, landed in Seattle. I wanted to become a Brody for Pearl Jam or Nirvana. That never happened, but I did see Pearl Jam in a little club in a little club in downtown Seattle called Rock Candy. If any of your listeners are that old and lived in Seattle at that time, I did see them in a little club back then, about 200 of us. But eventually, I made it to California. I made my way up to Seattle. Started kind of, it's interesting because what I was dealing with at that time was I was dealing in my early 20s at this time with what I was full on depressed. Right. I had some deep, deep depression. I happen to believe that depression, one of the core elements of depression, I happen to believe is unhealed, unprocessed anger. So I happen to believe there's two types of depression, and we can talk and debate, and there's clinical and functional. I was more functional than clinical. I did move into the clinical side of things, but in my 20s, I was dealing with a lot of anger. Right. And my anger, I was full on depressed, had girlfriends, couldn't keep them, had friends, couldn't keep them, had jobs, couldn't keep them. But I was out Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights. But fighting and controlling and hoarding, because anger externally, right? Two ways of anger kind of manifests itself, which I have found was externally, right? So you control, you fight, you hoard, you manipulate, you do all that stuff externally. And then in my 30s, it went from externally focused rage to internally focused rage. So in my 30s, I spent a lot of my life isolating and retreating and building walls. And since I can't trust some, I can't trust none. Since this person hurt me, everybody's going to get me. So I became very skeptical, negative, pessimistic. So in my 20s, I always tell people in my 20s, I try to fight the depression out of me. In my 30s, I try to fight the depression out of me. In my 40s, I literally try to kill it out of me. But having said that, so in my 20s, I kind of spent my time in Seattle, kind of making my way. I went to a technical college. I figured, government was paying for it, right? Military was paying for it. Let me go get an education. I got education. I got into more of a kind of project management type stuff. So I got a degree in project management, and then started moving into the software industry, where I ultimately landed in Microsoft. So I was working at Microsoft in the early 2000s. I kind of missed that bubble with Microsoft. I just missed it with stock with stocks and all that kind of stuff, which is actually probably a good thing for me because I wasn't emotionally mature to kind of handle that money, right? So it probably was a good thing for me. But in my 20s, again, the anxiety and depression I started kind of dealing with, and I recognized, to be honest with you, I recognized that my anxiousness came out in my late teens as OCD thoughts. So I had really vicious, intrusive thoughts, and one of the intrusive thoughts that I had is essentially I was one of the things that my brain was telling me back when I was about 16, 17 years old, that I was going to be gay. Right. That was the intrusive thought in me. Now, in my family at that time, even if you was gay, it wasn't accepted. Right. So I would battle myself on that. Like I'm not. I became very, very promiscuous at a very early age, trying to prove that I'm not, kind of thing. And it wasn't I wasn't attracted to the same sex. It was just the intrusive thoughts that came at me in that capacity. And I didn't know how to, I was fearful of what happens if my family finds out and this and that and this. And that kind of flipped into, I still dealt with intrusive thoughts that were more violent in nature, right? Like I'm going to hurt somebody, someone's going to hurt me, right? I'm going to hurt my family. So it started becoming more intrusive from a violent perspective. It became more sacrilegious as far as I hate Jesus and God and that kind of stuff. And so it really started the anxiety cycle within me started with intrusive thoughts, right? And then it started morphing into like general anxiety and social anxiety and element of depression, and it started growing. And I was working with therapy. Like I said, I was doing that for 20 years. I was without therapy and counseling and psychologists, psychiatrists. And I think each one of those had a place for me, right? They're what I needed at that given time. But to be frank with you and honest with you, none of those sessions touched the real issues in my life. And the real issues in my life is the two things that were going on in my life. This was it really started around 30 when I started having kids, where there's this cliche term that time will heal all wounds, right? And time doesn't really do that. Time eventually, what it does is it reveals or exposes these wounds. And relationships, what they often do is they often trigger those wounds, right? So what was happening with me, it was my wife, because I wanted her to get me or understand me, and she could never get me or understand me, and she definitely couldn't save me. She became my enemy, right? So everything that she did was triggering to me, right? She would just constantly trigger me with the mother wounds that I had, right? And so in that distance that she created when I was 40 years old, I'm 53 right now. So this was, 13 years ago. When she left me, she started giving me the distance that I needed, right, to kind of figure myself out. Right now, she was checked out. Right, she was gone. She was not coming back. She was done. And interesting enough, in that time, I would gaslight her. I'm like, "What are you going to do? I'm the money maker. I make the money. It's my house, my cars. Like, what are you going to do?" She was a stay-at-home mom. We had 4 kids, and I really I gaslit her in believing that she's stuck. Right, like, what are you going to do? And I remember, Kenny, one of the last things she said to me, I'll never forget, bro. Like, I'll never forget what she said to me. She's like, dude, you don't get it. Like, you just don't understand. Like, when women are done, this is what I found out about women. Women have a very, very long runway. Very long runway. But that runway does eventually run out. And when that runway runs out, you are done. Like, it takes an act of God to get them back. Right. Interesting enough, God did kind of break into that situation with us. And I was separated from my wife. I didn't see my kids for 6 months. I didn't see her for 9 months. Wow. And we were separated for 2 months. We were separated for 2 years. And in that time, I asked myself the question, what is it that I'm not doing? Like, am I so flawed? Am I so broken? Why can't I get myself out from under this? Like, what is it that I'm not doing? And there was a common theme in my journey of figuring myself out. There was a common theme over those 20 years that I was doing, and there was a common theme that I wasn't doing. And that common theme that I was doing was I was talking about what mom did, what dad didn't do, what my brother did, what my sister didn't do, what this sibling did, what the neighbors did, what my wife wasn't doing, what the kids weren't doing. What I wasn't doing is I wasn't working through the way I felt towards what was done to me. That was the common theme. The common theme that I spent the majority of my adult life talking. Right? I remember my wife. She's like, I remember her. She's like, bro, I am flipping tired of you treating me like a piece of shit. I'm tired of it. Like, I'm done. Right? And I said, oh, you're 100% right. You're 100% right. Well, I went to Dr. Google and Nurse Instagram, and I'm like, that's what I got. Right? I got this. I got that. I'm bipolar. I'm a borderline. I'm an anxious attachment. I'm avoidant. I'm a disorganized attachment. So I got obsessed over my labels.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I was looking to justify my behaviors on my story. This happened to me. That happened to me. This happened to me. That happened to me. And then when the story didn't work no more, right? Then I gravitated to the labels, and I spent the majority of my, a good portion of my marriage justifying why I was acting and behaving. I was feeling depressed. It wasn't that the feeling wasn't there, right? The feeling was definitely there, but I spent the majority of that time now fixated on the labels. And I was completely stuck in life. I became a dry drunk. You know what dry drunk is?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
I'm an addict.
yeah,
Sober 18 years, so I know what a dry drunk is. Yeah.
You know exactly what a dry drunk is. I became a dry drunk, right? And I had really unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? So I would buy stuff I couldn't afford to impress the people I didn't even like, right? So I got myself all in debt and had these unhealthy coping mechanisms, and I didn't buy the bottle of wine, but I bought the new iPad I couldn't afford, right? So it just switched until she created that distance in my life, and I started to realize. I asked myself the question: what is wrong with me? What am I not doing? And what I did in that, when I did in that silence, I can't remember. I really can't. I can't remember if I was listening to the Air Supply, if I was watching a Notebook. I can't remember what I was doing, but I got triggered. It was about 2 or 3 months into the process. I took a break from Microsoft, right? I'm sitting in this house by myself. Family's gone. And I'm like ruminating on what's wrong with me? Why can't I get myself out from under this? What am I, right? And I got triggered. And the first thing I did in that trigger is I reached for the bottle of wine. I opened up the bottle of wine. I poured the glass of wine. I took a sip of wine. I put the glass down. And I'm like, that feeling right there. What is that feeling that you've been running from, justifying, arguing, labeling, distracting, isolating? What is that feeling? And I didn't know what the feeling was. I had no clue what the feeling was. All I knew is I hated it. But for the first time in my life, I actually sat back and I allowed myself to feel that feeling. And when I realized, I used to call it feeling your feelings, and I still call it feeling your feelings. What I realized was what I was calling anxiety and what I was calling depression and what I was labeling borderline and anxious attached and avoidant was actually much, much deeper than what I was calling it. It was guilt, regret, shame, loneliness, unworthiness, anger, hurt, resentment, bitterness. Like it was much, much deeper than what I was calling it due to the story in my life that I never really dealt with. But time hadn't healed it. Time was eventually exposing it. My wife was triggering it, and then I was fighting and justifying and labeling and all that stuff. And so I spent the next kind of 6 to 8 months kind of like really kind of feeling my feelings. Right.
Okay. Hold up. Wait a minute. It's an interesting interview, no? Take a moment to click subscribe, follow, like, all those things. Please leave a comment in the comment section. Tell me what you think about this episode. Tell me what I could be doing better. I appreciate all the feedback. That's all I'm going to bother you with. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
And people get confused because when people say, people tend to be like, well, I feel this way all the time. I feel depressed and I feel anxious and I feel this and I feel this all the time. And I won't deny that, right? I won't deny it. What I will debate people on is most people, what they do is they live with their pain. They never deal with their pain. And living with it and dealing with it are two different things, right? And so because of that, most of us, I won't deny that most of us love it, right? And then what we do is we jump from relationship to relationship, right? Or we job to job, friend to friend, right? We tend to have behaviors, right, to get ourselves, the new shiny object is a new relationship in our life, the honeymoon phase, right? The honeymoon phase kind of decreases. We go through the kind of the argument phase, and then we have the fight phase, right? Then we play the breakup makeup game with the people, right? And honeymoon, fight, breakup, makeup, honeymoon, fight, breakup, right? And so I had that internally in my relationship with my wife. I had that for a good decade. We just didn't fit. She didn't physically kind of remove herself, if that makes sense. And from that kind of feeling her feelings, I started to kind of then deal with, right, the people that created the story in my life. Right. So back in the day, this was back in 2012-ish or so, 13-ish. I started to journal. I started to do some type of meditation stuff. And I just started to do little exercises that kind of helped me start dealing with what I call the why and the who, right? The story and who created the story. And through that, there's a lot of forgiveness that I've learned. There's a lot of grace that I've learned. There's a lot of setting boundaries, having a voice, seeing things from a different perspective, changing my belief systems about myself, right? I'm not what was done to me, right? I don't need to hold myself hostage to what was done to me. It doesn't justify what was done, doesn't nullify the pain, but I don't need to ruin my own life, right? I can break the cycle, right? I don't need to ruin my own life by holding myself hostage to what was done to me. And that's essentially what I was doing, right? I was essentially holding myself hostage to the people that created trauma in my life. And now, much maybe like you, right? Grew up in alcoholism, addiction. My brother overdosed when he was 38 years old. I'm the baby of the family. I was 36. I had to pull the plug. I had to pull the plug literally because my family wasn't straight enough to make a decision like that. Right? My sister's in her late 50s. She's still a meth head. Right. And so it's so that some of the stuff is generational, some of it's cultural, some of it's situational, but a lot of the core of that, what I have found is trauma. And how I moved into what I do today is I kind of moved into what I do today, where I started my social media channel. I started a social media page called Real Run Ryan. I became a runner. I became a marathoner. I needed to do something physically. And so I became a marathoner. And this was back in 2014, 15. Started, my page got, I had a pretty good run. I had about 20 or 30,000 followers at the time. And I found myself being asked about anxiety and depression. Right. So I found myself being asked by people, hey, how'd you get over anxiety? How'd you get over depression? I'm a runner. I'm showing pictures of myself running and, mental health and that kind of stuff. And I started asking the question to them, why are you asking me this question? Why are you asking me the question? How come you don't ask your counselor or your therapist or your psychologist or your psychiatrist and to be frank, a lot of them either wasn't going to see one, right? Wasn't getting really the help that they needed from the ones that they were seeing, or they were kind of in this jumping from one to the next, right? This one doesn't work, so I'll hit for 2 or 3 times, jump to this one 2 or 3 times, jump to this one 2 or 3 times. And so they were asking me how did I get over my anxiety and depression and those types of things. And so I found myself kind of just talking about my own story, so to say, right? And I saw a gap in the space where, for some reason, some people, maybe they don't feel comfortable going to a therapist, or I don't know. I don't know what the reason is, right? But I saw a gap between okay, let me kind of, so I got into life coaching is what I did, right? I became certified in life coaching. I got life coaching, and then I kind of niched in the anxiety depression kind of space, making sure that people know that I'm not a therapist. Right. I'm not a therapist. I don't do what you do. I don't want to do what you do. Right. I'm not a therapist. I don't claim to be. I don't want to be. My approach is a little bit different. And I saw some successes, right? People started to reach out to me. I started to see people, and I saw some successes in some of my approaches that are a bit more, they're a bit more, I don't really focus in on, I can't diagnose, right? So I don't diagnose. That's not what I do. But mine's more around behaviors, right? What are you doing in your behaviors, right? And so I became more of a behavioralist, right? Focusing on people, like dealing with how they behave in their relationships, how they behave with themselves, how they have the relationship within inside themselves. And so I started to fixate and started to work on that portion of people, which then lifted the anxiety and depression. Right? Because what I found is a lot of them are struggling with anxiety and depression due to how they're behaving, right, with what they feel. So I became more in tune, more of a dealing with people's feelings, which then changes their behaviors, which then works on their belief systems and those types of things. So that's kind of how, I know that was long winded, but that's kind of how I got into the space that I'm in, if that makes sense.
When you had already started doing work on yourself, and then you started to implement physical exercise as another tool to continue to grow. How did that help? Did it help bolster the tool bag or the tools that you had in the tool bag? How did that help?
Yes. So interesting question, because it started to help me, right? It was kind of like, what people don't get is when you run for 2 hours, right? That's 2 hours of no emails, no bills, no phone calls, no text messages, no people wanting something, right? So it's 2 hours of freedom, so to say. So it started off being very, very therapeutic for me, right? But if I'm brutally honest with you, it became another coping mechanism of mine. Right? I didn't go out. I remember I didn't go. I went out to punish myself, right? Not to be therapeutic with myself. Right. And what I found is it became another distraction for me. Right. And another thing that I did that drew me away from my problems. Right. Drew me away from what I needed to deal with which really was myself. So it started off therapeutic. I always encourage people to do something physically, walking, exercising, going to the gym, running. I'm still run today. Right. I'm still a runner today. I don't run marathons anymore. I run more half marathons, but I'm still a runner. And I think that it's turned more therapeutic for me now, but at that time, it was more of a punishment for me, right? It built kind of into a punishment for myself. Interesting enough, I have found that to be somewhat true with people. They justify, I'm exercising, right? That's what they justify to themselves. I'm exercising, but it becomes another distraction for them, right? They're spending 5 hours in the gym, right, to not face life. Right. So I have often found that in the people I work with, it just becomes another distraction. It could be therapeutic, but anything in moderation, right? Specifically, if you're running from, distracted from, or hiding from, your life, that becomes untherapeutic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I can definitely see that, particularly with endurance. I mean, I guess powerlifting too, because it can become a way to hide
Yes.
the what you feel like on the inside by trying to present a certain image. And then endurance running, I can see it as well. I think for me, I'm so thankful that I attempted endurance running and put into it, because so what I could see is in it, I could see how people would escape their issues by doing it, by being out, especially like marathon stuff, ultra stuff,
Right. Yeah.
that sort of thing, being out running for 5 hours or 24 hours or something, right?
Right.
Crazy stuff. But for me, it was this thing where it's like, I'm running through to meet a new part of myself.
Got it.
Like,
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah. So I'm learning this new side of myself that
right,
I never thought was even in there.
right,
And
right,
then
right,
I get to shake hands with that guy. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I look up to you. Like
right,
like you're someone I look up to. And that's actually
right.
me. And that's pretty cool. And so being able to do that was amazing now. And I went pretty hard for 2+ years in that experience. And I learned a lot about myself. And I feel like I became a better father, more attuned father. I became a better clinician. A lot of my work has to do with resilience. So all that helped. And then in jiu-jitsu, I tore my ACL last September.
Got it.
And
Got it. Got
so there went the running. And it was funny because on my last 100-mile race, I'm promising to myself, and I got a recording of it. I'm promising to myself, I said, this is my last, I'm taking a break.
it. Got it.
I'm
Got it.
done for a while. I need to spend more time with my kids. And then
Right.
2 weeks later in jiu-jitsu, my knees were fine. 2 weeks later in jiu-jitsu, ACL pops. And I'm like, all right, God. All right. I guess that's what I'm doing now. I'm taking all the time that I was spending on this
Right.
and on those long runs where you're kind of like, man, like I should be with my kids right now. And I'm
Right.
feeling
Right.
guilt.
Right.
Now I don't have that. And so I'm able to take the benefits of the running. And I think it was a God thing. You know, it was a hard process of me and still kind of building up to this growing back, this ACL. But like now being able to be like, yeah, no time commitments towards this self-resiliency thing. No, now I get to invest into this, even though, you know, I think I'm a good dad. My kids seem to like me and my wife seems to respect me. And so, but now now I'm coaching 2 little league teams, you know,
Right. Right. Yeah.
and I get to invest into this side of things. And so, yeah, pretty cool stuff. But I can definitely see on the other end of it. And it's like, you look within the running community, not everybody out there is healthy or doing it for the same reason I was doing it. You know?
Right. Right.
And
Exactly.
so, yeah.
And my intention, right, was to do exactly what you did. And to be honest with you, I found myself very resilient, right? I found myself that I can do things, I can achieve things. If I put my mind to it, I can do that. But I remember there was one particular race that I did that I'm like, I was fighting myself the whole time, right? It wasn't though I was exhausted. I trained for it. I did, you know, I was never a sub-3 marathoner, right? I mean, I started running till I was 40 something years old, and so it wasn't it. So I did the achievement felt good, but it became more of like, what am I achieving here, right? It's kind of like, what are you doing right now? Are you running for? What are you running for? Right? Are you running to resolve and find that piece of you, or are you running to run from that piece of you? Right? Because I'm still to this day, I am a grass is greener type of guy. Right? I live in Georgia. I want to live in California. I live in California. I want to live in Seattle. I live in Seattle. I want to go back to New York. I live in New York. I want to go back to Texas. I'm in Texas. I want to live in Chicago. I am the grass is greener type of person, right? And I spent a lot of my adult life running from my problems, but I showed up everywhere I went. Right. So I had to realize that I was a problem, not the problem. I was a problem. And I had to eventually kind of bloom where I was planted. Right. I had to eventually kind of bloom where I was planted, which is actually, I've been here in Atlanta since 2013. And so I still run. I still enjoy it. Right. It's become more therapeutic for me now. Right. Than running for myself, so to say. Right. So it's become more therapeutic. I've learned to kind of integrate it within my schedule of life, right? I kind of integrated with the schedule of life rather than, especially if you were 100-mile, right? I mean, you were just it's the trainings that kill you, right? I can only imagine it's the marathon, it's the 4 to 5 month training that killed me. It wasn't the actual marathon, right? It was actually the training of it. And then you felt guilty for missing a day, or you got hurt, and now you feel, regret because of this. And then you started asking the question, I should with kids, and then the wife would the wife would bring the kids to the race with you, and she's kind of happy for you, but irritated with you because the kids need a nap and all that kind of stuff. So it just it became untherapeutic, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Even though there was a lot of benefit from it.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to kind of delve a little bit more into the anxiety side of things, because this is seems to be like the and if there's a epidemic of something, then it's going to be that. And so
Right.
yeah, I mean, I guess let's first say, have you give your understanding or definition of what anxiety is, and then, as we even identify what it is, and we begin to look at things that begin to help us work through it, like I'm hearing you say identifying feelings and working through those feelings,
Yes.
and all that is a part of it. But I want to kind of get into even more details about what that means, because
Okay.
on the other end of it, it's like if you're all feelings, then that's all bad too. Like
Yeah.
you, if it's just 100% feelings, then all of a sudden, you can quickly get into a space where you lose reality,
Yes.
and
100%.
so,
Yes.
but
Yes.
so yeah, I guess first let's just start with your understanding of what anxiety is at a baseline, and then areas and methods that you feel like help specifically and practically for people to work through it.
You got okay. So I happen to believe that there's two types of anxiety. Okay. I believe that there is a majority of us. So the way my mind kind of thinks about this is that there's two types of anxiety. There's hundreds of ways in which that anxiety manifests itself. General anxiety, social anxiety, intrusive thoughts, general, different ways in which it manifests itself. So I always kind of explain anxiety to be the manifestation of unhealed, unprocessed traumas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's baseline. In that, I happen to believe there's two types of anxiety. There is what I call general anxiety, and general anxiety is when you think about the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if I lose my job? What if she leaves me? What if he leaves me? What if I get sick? What if I get COVID? What if, what if, what if, what if, right? So you constantly ruminate and go over and think about the what ifs. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I call that general anxiety. I think that a majority of us, at least the people that have come to me and I work with, including myself, I happen to believe that I had the thinking, ruminating, what if anxiety. When I got honest with myself and I started really kind of understanding what's wrong with me, I started to realize, wait a second, there's really two types of that I have found. There's general what if, and then there's complex anxiety. And complex anxiety, I happen to believe it's the feeling of what was. So you have the ruminating, general what if, the thinking, and then you got the feeling of what was. Now, what's the what was? The what was are those life experiences in one's life that for many of us were traumatic. And those traumas live in our bodies through the way we feel, right? So
Mm-hmm.
actually I'll debate people that you typically why you ruminate on what ifing is because of the feeling of what was.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the baseline, I believe that it's unhealed, unprocessed traumas, right? That's baseline what I believe. I believe that there's two types. There is what if general, there is complex with what was. And I always tell people that we tend to act in life and attract in life. So we're acting and behaving and we're attracting people based off what we believe. Now, where do those beliefs come from? Those beliefs come from our life experiences. And for many of us, those life experiences were traumatic. Those traumas live in our body through the way we feel. So actually, we're acting and attracting based off the way we feel. I'll give you a classic example of what I'm talking about. So I happen to believe that the anxious attached and the avoidant, what they're really struggling with, that's their behaviors, right? And typically, as you know, the anxious attached typically falls in love with the avoidant, right? You
Mm-hmm.
got this push and pull thing kind of going on. I happen to believe that that type of behavior is driven off of the feeling of loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
So I happen to believe that they're both struggling with loneliness. One just runs and retreats, and the other one anxiously attached, controls, hoards, and manipulates, while the other one builds walls and isolates and runs. Right? Both struggling with the feelings of loneliness. Just they have both their behaviors are different in way they do that. Right? Now, where does the loneliness come from? The loneliness comes from the trauma of abandonment and neglect. right? So we were abandoned, we were neglected. That gives us a feeling of loneliness in our life. And the hint of that loneliness causes us to control, hoard, or manipulate, anxious, attached, or run, retreat, and retract and build walls, the avoiding. Now, traditional therapy says, "Oh, it change the way you think, right? Change your partner, like look at it from a different perspective, right?" So, traditional therapy will try to get you to change the way you think about the situation, when the real reason why they're acting that way is the feeling of loneliness.
Mm.
Now, how do you deal with the loneliness? You deal with the loneliness by allowing yourself to feel the loneliness, right? Because that's the behaviors that we do. Right. So I happen to believe a lot of the complex anxiety in our life is not a rational, adult, thinking, successful, men, women's problem. I happen to believe it's an inner child hurt trauma problem that often shows itself irrationally through the way you feel. Right. And that drives your behaviors. So what was happening with me and my wife is a hint of loneliness, a hint of that abandonment, a hint of that neglect would cause me to control, hoard, and manipulate. And then when I finally had her, right, she was mine. Then I got scared of, holy shit, wait, let me retract, build walls. So I was the disorganized avoidant, right?
Yeah.
That is what you would label me, right? Disorganized avoidant. But really, I was struggling with the feelings of loneliness that she was triggering due to what happened to me. So the work to get yourself out from under the behaviors is to work through the way you feel. Now, how do you do that? At least from my perspective, you cannot heal what you refuse to feel. So you have to allow yourself to feel that feeling and connect with that feeling. So because I don't believe it's a rational adult thinking problem, we connect with that inner childhood trauma side of us by allowing ourselves to feel that feeling. Now, I won't deny you have the folks that all they do is work off of the way they feel. Right? Every decision is based off the way they feel. Everything they do is based off the way they feel. What they don't realize and what they never really come to a deeper understanding about themselves, I call it attunement. Right? Now, forgive me with this word because I have learned to be irritated with the word awareness. I think awareness has become another bullshit term that people use to stay stuck in life. Everybody has aware. They're totally aware. Everybody has a level of awareness, but no one's working off of that awareness. Awareness, I won't deny, is the first step to healing. Awareness leads you to a level of acknowledgement. Seeing you and seeing me, that's a level of acknowledgement, right? I feel feelings. I have these behaviors. I'm in these toxic relationships. I'm kind of doing this and doing that. So that's a level of acknowledgement where people fake themselves out. This is where people fake themselves out. They fake themselves out with believing that since they're acknowledging this, that, right, that they're accepting this, that, right? The acknowledgement and acceptance are a chasm far wide. So the job that I believe that you and I need to do is bridge the gap between acknowledging and accepting. Well, how do we do that? Right? For the work that I do, I kind of go through this discovery phase with people. And this discovery phase consists of where do you feel feelings? Head, neck, shoulders, arms, chest, legs. I work with a woman in New York who feels it in her feet. Where you feel feelings helps you understand what you are feeling. We call it depression. We call it anxiety. We label it this. We label it that. But what is it? Is it loneliness? Is it guilt? Is it hurt? Is it anger? What is it at a deeper level? That helps you understand what you're feeling. And then as you start to understand deeper, you come more in tune with yourself, right? To know what you're feeling. That enables you to now deal with why you feel the feeling. That's the story and who created the story. And so that bridging of the gap between the acknowledgement and acceptance leads to a level of release or reprieve of the feelings, right? Then you have a level of peace. But it's too many of us are too busy believing that since we're acknowledging, I do this, I do that, right? I have this, I have that, that we're accepting the pieces of ourselves or the parts of ourselves that are struggling with those feelings, right? So, and some of that was the 6-year-old kid in me. Some of this was the 16-year-old kid with me. Some of this was a 26-year-old young adult in me, right? And so I had to identify these different parts of ourselves. Now, some people will call it family systems, right? Internal family system. People might call it that. I do believe there's an element of adult child, and there's these different parts of ourselves, right? So there is I do agree there is some internal family systems kind of things going on. But again, I am not a therapist, right? So I'm not one, so I don't really kind of dive into that kind of stuff. My work is really around kind of integrating with that hurt in us by allowing yourself to feel that hurt. Now, there's a really cool somatic experience I do with people where I kind of, let's not wait for your husband or wife or significant other or friend or boyfriend or coach or teacher to trigger you. Let's go confront these feelings. Right. So I do a meditative somatic work where we go and confront those feelings, right? I kind of put people into a meditative state. I'm not hypnotizing them or anything like that. I just kind of put them into a meditative state, and I do some work around feelings, right? I say some words to them and to feel it in their body. So essentially what I'm doing with them, Kenny, is I'm triggering them in a controlled environment. Essentially is what I'm doing with them. And when we trigger them in a controlled environment, they feel these feelings in a controlled environment. They know how to handle those feelings in an uncontrolled environment. Right. And essentially what I'm trying to do with this work is I'm trying to get people to understand what they're feeling, right? There's a level of validation, like the loneliness in me. It's interesting because I feel guilt, regret, loneliness, or inadequacy in the same place, in the same heaviness, in the same everything. It feels the same in my body, right? Loneliness and inadequacy feels the same in my body. I just have become more in tune with myself to know that just because I feel it doesn't mean it's fact, right? So I have learned that feeling of inadequacy is a lie, right? So I don't need to feel inadequate if Kenny asks me a question that I can't just respond to, right? I need to think about it, and I don't know how to respond to it because I have some deep core wounds of inadequacy, right? And those deep core wounds of inadequacy not often, but sometimes gets triggered inside of me, right? Especially in the work that I do, where not everybody gets what I'm doing, and so those I understand what I'm feeling. That oftentimes that inadequacy is tied to a belief, right? And that belief is that I'm inadequate. Well, I don't believe that no more, right? Since I don't believe that no more, even though that feeling of inadequacy comes up in me, I don't believe it. I don't need to react off of it, right? So I have learned to kind of identify what I'm feeling, right, inside my body, even though where I feel it's the same, right? Now the intensity in which it comes at me is different. Right. The intensity and the frequency has decreased, but I have some deep traumas. Right. And so life still comes at me. Right. And stuff still triggers me. Right. But the way I react to those triggers is much different because I worked at the feelings of it and I changed my beliefs of it. If that makes sense. And that's kind of that's what I started with. I start with like feeling your feelings, and then that enables you to understand what you're feeling, right? And then not every feeling you feel is true, right? Not every thought that comes at you is true, right? And I will say there's a physical element to this, there's a spiritual element to this, there's a mental element of this, there's different capacities that kind of go into that, and knowing yourself at a level of getting out of awareness and more of attunement with yourself. You start to realize, okay, I don't need to react off of this fictional feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, that's the first process. That's not where the healing is done, right? That's understanding yourself to allow yourself to feel your feelings. Healing comes on the second phase, and the second phase is dealing with the story and the person who created the story. Right. So that you kind of get set up to allow yourself to kind of you trigger yourself in a controlled environment. So now you know how to handle it in an uncontrolled environment, dealing with the story of why and the who. Right. And there is a technique I call love lettering. There's a deep forgiveness process that I do with people. Right. So some forgiveness work I do with people, because there's these people have these anchors in their life. When it comes to trauma, is that they have these anchors. I call them anchors in their life. And these anchors are sometimes emotional, right? Sometimes relational, sometimes cultural, sometimes physiological, sometimes, mental. So, but one of the biggest anchors I've seen with people, one of the biggest anchors I've seen is the inability to forgive.
Mm-hmm.
People
Oh
don't know
yeah.
they don't know how to forgive. And they don't know how to forgive themselves first. Right. So people hold themselves hostage to themselves. Right. And that was one of the biggest things that I had to work through for myself. Right. I was, a lot of my pain was self-inflicted. Right. And so I had to kind of work through the element of forgiving myself. And when I forgave myself, then I could give out what I had. Right. You really can't give out what you ain't got. Right. So I had to work through the element of forgiveness, because forgiveness is one of the biggest anchors in people's lives. Right. First for themselves. Right. You probably see this on the daily. I know I do. People hold themselves hostage to the stuff that they did 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they just feel like,
Yeah.
oh, guilt and regret and shame and everything, toxic shame. Like they feel all types of feelings associated to what they've done. Right. Or what they didn't do. Right. And so they tend to just hold themselves hostage. And that's one of the biggest anchors I have found in people's lives. And if I can get them to kind of forgive themselves, then they have the capacity to now forgive others. And interesting enough, in my own life, I always tell people that my mother's my shiny object in my room, right? My father wasn't in my life, so I have no gauge of my father. It was traumatic not having a father around any which way. But my mother was a shiny object in my room, and she afflicted most of the trauma in my life because she was in my life. But I always tell people that I changed my perspective on my mother, right? Because I realized that I was dealing with a lot in life. I was dealing with my mother's trauma, right? My mother's mother didn't deal with her stuff. My mother didn't deal with her stuff, and it bled into her kids, right? And so I started to change my perspective of my mother through the act of forgiving my mother, which then changed the beliefs in me.
Practicality wise,
It,
how are you doing that? Like how are you forgiving? So for the person that's listening and they're like, that sounds amazing, but how do I do it? How do they do it?
And
And that kind of stuff.
there's a journaling for your listeners. If you do journal, I believe in journaling. Journaling is a very, very powerful tool. If you want to put your journaling on steroids, you journal with your non-dominant hand.
Mm.
You really want to have some breakthroughs in healing. You really want to go to another level. You really want to take it up a notch. Whenever you journal with your non-dominant hand. Your non-dominant hand taps into your right hemisphere of your brain, which stores memory, traumas, emotions, feelings. Right. The dominant hand is more rational. It's more adult. It's more thinking. It's more. This is not a rational adult thinking problem. So I have everybody I work with journal with their non-dominant hand. They hate it. They can't stand it. It's hard. It's difficult. It's a pain in the ass. It hurts. All that stuff. And I always tell them, well, just think about that little girl, little boy in you. Think about what that side of you feels. Right? You're just feeling that pain. Good. Right? That's what I want you to do. I want you to feel the pain. That's the purpose of the work. Right? But if you want to put your journaling on steroids, use your non-dominant hand. Having said that, there's this kind of back and forth kind of thing that happens. There's a pretty cool technique that I allow people to do it. You can go on my website. I actually have a workbook with this. I create a workbook with this where you kind of have the inner child trauma speaking to maybe the adult side of ourselves, maybe how the adult side of ourselves handle situations, those types of things. And then the emotional feeling side needs you're giving that side of you a voice. Right. And through that voice, through writing, through journaling, it's giving that side of a voice to say what I need to say to the perpetrator. Because here's the thing about forgiveness. True forgiveness is never, ever for the perpetrator. It's always for the perpetrated. It's for us, not for them. right? I kind of wrote these love letters to myself. I wrote these love letters to, I kind of made a list, and mom was at the top of the list. And I wrote what I call these love letters tied to what I felt, what I call the forgiveness work. And my mother never got one of my letters because it wasn't for her. It was for me. It was for that inner child trauma in me, right? It was that side of me, that little boy in me that got his adolescence ripped from him. Right. No, it's interesting. A side note, I remember I saw a therapist. She was an OCD therapist, and she was kind of the breaking point for me, if I'm brutally honest. Where I went to her, it was in 2011, and I'm like, I'm in a bad place, man. Like, like my marriage is deteriorating. My kids can't stand me. I have no authentic friendships. I got nothing but toxic family members. I am losing my career in Microsoft. Like, I'm in a bad place. Like I can't. I can't exist no more. I can't deal with this. Tell me about mom. Tell me about dad. And I'm like, okay, I'll tell you about mom. All right, listen, I've been talking about mom and dad for 20 years, right? Dad's not in the picture, right? Dad, that's traumatizing in itself. Dad's not in the picture, never was in the picture, right? Actually, my mom made that decision that he was a piece of shit for me, which actually was traumatizing because I couldn't make that decision on my own, right? Because she made that decision for me, which another story. But I remember going to her and I'm like, listen, I can tell you details about mom. I can smell the cigarettes. I can smell the vodka. I can see patterns. I can tell you details upon details upon details and how my mother touched me inappropriately as a young boy. How do I save my marriage? How do I not traumatize my kids? How do I deal with these feelings of filthiness and disgustingness whenever my wife or little daughter wants to sit on my lap, right? Or my wife wants to hold my hand? What do I do with that? Right. And so the act of forgiveness started to realize that it doesn't justify what my mother did. It doesn't nullify the pain in which she inflicted, but it did give me an element of getting I didn't talk to my mother for 10 years, from 18 to 28, not one word. Merry Christmas. Happy birthday. I live in Seattle. I got married. I work at Microsoft. You're a grandmother. She should have had me on the milk carton. I was non-existent for 10 years. Didn't say one word to her. And she was in complete control of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I had the noose around my neck, choking myself out on bitterness and resentment and unworthiness and inadequacies and hurt and anger that she inflicted that my wife and kids and coworkers and friends were getting the brunt of. Right. So I had to learn to kind of work through that pain that she inflicted with kind of this journaling. Right. And so it's quite interesting, where very paralyzing at times. I won't deny that. Very, very paralyzing. Working through this stuff is very, very paralyzing, which I eventually guess that you yourself and people that you work with realize or know. But it could be very, very liberating, very freeing, right? Because what I was given the people in my life that were in complete control of my life was the power in life. Right. I had 3 people that were dead. My brother, my stepfather, and my father were dead. And they were in complete control of my life. Right. And they weren't even in my life ever again. Mm-hmm. Right. So what I did is I was giving those people the power when they didn't even deserve the power. Right. And when I started to release these feelings, work through the feelings to kind of release the story and the people who created the story, I started to realize that, forgiveness is a key element of our healing. And it's quite interesting to me, man, when I started to feel my feelings, started working through the story of it, started journaling, anxiety started to lift, depression started to lift, right? I was no longer, labeled bipolar or borderline. I was no longer labeled, these things. Everything started to lift. It saved my marriage. It brought my family back. I changed careers. I got out of Microsoft. I do this now. I left Seattle. I live in Atlanta. Everything started to change externally when I started to heal internally. Right? Everything started to change. Now, that doesn't mean I don't still have my battles, right? And things come up and life comes up and life is stressful and, I don't get triggered and all that stuff. It's still stuff. It's just the way I navigate life is much, much different. from doing the practical type stuff, right? Like writing out your thoughts and just keeping a journal, using your non-dominant hand, seeing things for what they are rather than what you want them to be, right? Like quit falling in love with the hope and fall in love with the reality, right? Get real with yourself, be honest with yourself, those types of things, right? And when you do that, again, it's very paralyzing, but if you allow it, it can be very, very free. You see what I'm saying? It makes sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say you had talked about labels and like the initial, for me with labels and like diagnosis, the initial feeling of acceptance that you get from it, the initial like, yes, okay, like this is why I suck,
Right.
because of whatever, fill in the blank. That for me, and what I've seen with a lot of people, labels along with feelings that labels create later on when you start depending on the label to be your excuse for all your issues in life, creates a victim mentality, creates, for the lack of a better word, but creates this victim mindset of like life sucks because of circumstances outside of yourself and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And because every time you've attempted to do something about it, you've fallen flat on your face.
Right.
Or whatever the excuse is. Right.
Right.
So I guess there's not a big question behind it. How would I state this in a question? What are your thoughts around victim mentality?
So some of your listeners, I know some of my clients can't stand when I bring that term up because there's a brutal honesty to it.
Yeah.
Right. People find themselves, again, holding on to labels and bullshit terms to keep themselves stuck in life. They can't stand it. They hate it, but they can't stop it because they believe it. Right. And now if you have a victim mentality, what do victims do? They get victimized. Right. So they create no boundaries. They don't have a voice. They fall. They don't see the reality of situations. Right. And they find themselves stuck. They can't stand it. They hate it, but they can't stop it because they believe that they deserve it. They believe that they deserve it. Right. So when you have that false narrative in your life, you tend to everything that happens to you. Right. You get victimized because that's what victims do. Right. So that's what happens to people. And you have to change that narrative by, I happen to believe, changing what you believe. Right. Now, for me, how do you change what you believe? You change what you believe by changing the way you think. How do you change the way you think? You change the way you think by working through the way you feel. Right. And so most people that have that victim mentality, they tend to, everything's always happening to them. Things are always coming up. Right. Interesting enough, what I have found as a common kind of undertone of that, right, is actually a level of addiction. They're actually addicted to that mentality. So if they're addicted to that mentality, they find themselves creating or being in the middle of drama, right? Because they're actually addicted to their trauma. And so they find themselves doing the very thing that they can't stand. Right. And so again, how do you get yourself out from under that? Right. Is you have to be like me. Right. Interesting enough, when I try to commit suicide, that's not when I hit rock bottom. That wasn't rock bottom for me. Rock bottom was seeing my wife and 4 kids sail off. Right. That was the rock bottom for me. And in doing that, I'm like, whoa. And when she sailed off of my life, the angst attached in me, what did I do? Oh, I'm sorry. I swear I'll change. I'll swear I'll be better. This or that, right? I did that for 10 years, right? Because the angst attachment in me. And I always tell people that my wife saved me by leaving me. Right? She loved me so much that she left me. Counterintuitive. At the time, it didn't make sense. At the time, I'm like, I just got a psych ward. This is what I need you the most. Like, what are you doing? I can't believe you're doing this. Right? I can't believe you're leaving me like this and all that kind of stuff. Right? But she actually loved me so much, she left me. And to be honest with you, I wasn't the altruistic, like I'm going to heal for my kids and heal for this marriage and I'm going to be better for them. And I was too selfish for that, to be honest with you. I'm just like, wait, I got to fix me, because if I fix me, things will resolve itself, right? If that is a reconciliation, great. And I will tell you, we both had some faith associated with us, right? We were both believers. And so we did have an undertone of faith associated with that. And we did have 4 young kids. So our dynamics was a bit different. I had mentors and coaches in my life that came alongside and kind of held me accountable and kind of, helped me kind of work through my stuff as I was kind of working through my stuff as well. So I did have some brothers in arms. There's no doubt about it. But in that process, I didn't do it to reconcile the marriage, right? I wasn't that altruistic. I really wasn't. And to be honest with you, I had myself a victim mentality, right? Because something was always happening to me, right? Something was always going on. And I became stuck in that cycle of just kind of expecting different results, doing the same thing, right? Just like doing the same thing, expecting different results. And, I mean, as you know, it doesn't work like that. So sometimes you got to get real with yourself. And unfortunately, whether we like to know this or not, people tend to work through pain, right? And sometimes that pain needs to be inflicted, unfortunately, right? And so the pain of my wife leaving me, because I grew up in a divorced home, right? I didn't know my father. My mom got remarried to a guy I couldn't stand and hated. And, I was kind of I was the baby of the family. So I always felt like this black sheep. I was very emotional kid. I felt my feelings a lot. I was a feeler, and I got reprimanded for that, right? You're a sissy, you're a fag, you're this, you're that. And so I wasn't the tough kid, and I was put down because of that. And so again, like I was in my marriage, she would like give me this look, or she would act a certain way that would bring up the mother wound in me, right? It would go right to the mother wound. And then I've learned, through my 20s of the anger raging externally, I got to be the tough kid, right? And interesting enough, my mother wound actually gave me a somewhat of a disdain for women. Interesting enough. Now, 98% of the people I see today are women. If you go check out any of my content, it's typically associated to women, right? Because I have kind of this heart for women where, since one has hurt me, all were out to get me. Since I couldn't trust some, doesn't mean I couldn't trust none, right? And if my mom would have healed her traumas in her 20s, she wouldn't have the revolving door of men in her life, right? And her kids may have turned out a little bit different. Right. So I kind of have a heart for women because of my mother wounds, interesting enough. No, I see men as well, but because men, when we're honest, right, we have father and mother wounds, right? When we're honest with ourselves. Men, interesting enough, women, you gotta get them to trust you. You have to kind of work through some barriers with them from an emotional perspective. They have a really strong protective self about themselves. Men, when they're ready to heal, right, they'll go to work. Right, they'll go to work. You have to finesse them as well, but they'll go to work. Yeah, they're very action oriented, right? This is my problem. Let's solve this problem, so to say, right? Women kind of have that as well. It's a little bit different, but I have found women to be more real than men, actually. Right? Women tend to when they're done, they're done, and when they're ready to kind of do the work, they'll do the work. But so women tend to be a bit more open, and I don't know if it's cultural, I don't know if it's society, I don't know what the difference is. I don't know if we're brought up different. I don't know. But again, men, when they click, when they're ready to heal, they boom, right? They go right to work. Interesting enough. But men, they have deep mother and father wounds. Right. And unfortunately, the culture has taught us to kind of hide our emotions, right? Don't be emotional, right? Be action orientated, right? Be the success, be this, be that, right? Be the doer, right? And so they don't have time to kind of deal with their emotions. But meanwhile, they're running havoc in their relationships. Right. I can't tell you 90% of women I see, or what 90% of the people I see are women, and a good 90% of them have toxic relationships with men. right? Because men they don't deal with their stuff, right? And so what they do is they bleed on people that don't cut them, typically the women in their life and kids. And so, just the relationships are they're just damaged, right? Because the men don't want to work on themselves. Unfortunately, I was really, I mean, I get it. I don't accept it, but I get it, right? Because men need help just as much as women do. If that, and hopefully you probably see that in your practice.
Yeah, definitely. I think the differences are just kind of biological. There's some cultural elements to it, but it does seem to be more biological. But I think, like one of the things you had mentioned in terms of getting through the victim mentality was the advantages that you had. And I think it's important to acknowledge those, because these are things that you can do to implement to help you within the victim mentality and forgiveness and all the work that you got to do. Right.
Yeah.
And so you had mentioned faith, like having a faith in God.
Yep.
I'm also a man of faith, and that faith grew as a result of me and my work, doing my own personal work. And then community, you said you had a group of guys around you who hold you accountable, huge. And then family. And even though at the time your priority was more the selfish me over family,
right?
Family still played a role. Like if there was 100%. No family, then what are you doing? Like I guarantee you, if you took family out of that element, then you would have probably been gone much longer, right?
Yes,
like you would have been down, your road would have been longer in terms of being lost. So
100%.
But these are things that, at least in terms of faith and community, that you can implement as tools to help you in this journey.
Yeah, definitely. Faith, my faith is very important to me. It's very strong. I became a believer when I was later in life. So I became a believer when I was 28. And I thought when I found God, so to say, when He found me, I found Him actually. Life's gonna be great, right? All of it, anxiety's gonna be gone, depression's gonna be gone, life's gonna be great. Oh yeah, right, not even close, right? I mean, things sounded a little bit, in this element, if we may, even in the Christian community, but it's all faiths, right? I see all faiths, right? I see agnostic, atheist, Muslim, Christian, Jewish. I mean, I've seen them all, right? The faiths don't know what to do with struggles of depression and anxiety. They don't really know how to handle that element. I happen to believe that there's kind of these three foundations of ourselves. We are physical, emotional, or mental, and spiritual. And interesting enough, if I may, I happen to believe in self-love. Okay, I'm a big proponent of self-love. I think the gurus on Instagram teach it wrong, because self-love, you don't get self-love. Love is an action. Love is a verb. Love is something that you do. Yes. Right? You want to be loved, you do love. Right? So love is an action. It's a verb. And so what happens lots of times is self-love. You don't just get it. It doesn't happen. You prove it. Self-love is proved. Yeah. You prove self-love. Well, how do you prove self-love? You prove self-love by doing self-care, right? Well, how do you do self-care, right? Self-care is a lot more than getting a haircut and your nails done, right? So I look at self-care in three distinct areas. I look at self-care in how are you doing emotionally / mentally? How are you doing physically, right? And then, interesting enough, a lot of people struggle with this, and how are you doing spiritually? Now, I tell people, you don't need to believe what I believe, but you better believe it's something bigger than you. Because you've been trying to do this on your own and you've been failing at it. So you better, I don't know what that is, right? And we can debate and we can go through the faith cycle, right? But you better believe it's something bigger than you. And I always tell people that you can be going to Bible study, you can be praying, you can be doing all this stuff 24/7, but if you're not working on yourself emotionally and mentally and physically, you are kidding yourself. You could be eating correctly, running marathons, going to the doctor. Like you could be just killing it physically. If you're not working on yourself emotionally / mentally and spiritually, you are absolutely kidding yourself. You could be seeing me. You could be seeing you. You could be journaling. You could be reading books. You could be feeling your feelings. You could be meditating. You could be doing all that stuff all day long. But if you're not dealing with yourself physically, working on yourself physically, and spiritually, you are completely faking yourself out.
Hmm.
It's consistency in all three of those areas. That proves the self-love. Now, where people struggle and where the gurus on Instagram teach it wrong is you'll never love something that you don't care for. And you will never care for something you don't accept. So self-acceptance, it starts with self-acceptance. Self-acceptance drives you to do self-care. You can't help it, right? Drives you to do self-care, and then that proves self-love. So really, my work / our work should get to a place where people are learning to self-accept themselves. How they learn to self-accept themselves? They'll learn to self-accept themselves by realizing, okay, what I'm feeling, not every feeling is right or real, right? Am I challenging the way I think from a different perspective? Am I creating boundaries? Do I have a voice? Do I quit falling in love with the hope? Do I see the reality? Am I making changes? Right? Am I feeling my feelings? Am I doing those things from a self-acceptance perspective? And I happen to believe acceptance, it kind of forks, right? It kind of forks where when you accept yourself, when you truly come to a level of self-acceptance, you have a level of release of the feelings and reprieve of the feelings. And then that's one way. And then it goes into and it drives the self-care. And I'm telling you, bro, I don't know for you, but for me, when I'm struggling in life, when my marriage is teetering, right? When I'm having a rough day, when I'm like I'm just things are not clicking, right? I'm just huffing through life. I'm struggling. It's typically because I'm struggling in one of these three areas of life.
Mm-hmm.
Physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Typically for me, it's the spiritual piece. Right? I'm typically struggling in that capacity. And it's not like it becomes an integrated piece of life, right? It becomes part of life from a physical, emotional / mental, spiritual. It just becomes integrated, and as it integrates it into life, then you prove the self-love. And you can't give something you ain't got, right?
Mm-hmm.
So interesting enough, how are you going to love your spouse if if we may, two greatest commandments, right? At least from a biblical, from a Christian perspective, love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. What's the second greatest commandment?
You have people.
Love your neighbor,
Yeah.
as yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I will, if I may, how can you love your neighbor if you don't love yourself? How can you prove you love God without loving your neighbor? So doesn't it really start with self-love? Right? Because you can't give something you ain't got. Right, we're already depleted. We're depleted. It's interesting that I always tell people that when I put myself last in life, everybody got my worst. When I put myself first in life, everybody got my best.
Okay, Ryan. So, but what about people that do not love themselves?
Well,
What about
100%.
people that can't stand themselves?
Right.
Then how do they love another?
Right, exactly. So that's my argument, right? My argument, that's my exact argument. We tend to look for things externally and want things and fish for things and wish for things and hope for things and cling on to things externally because we're missing it internally.
Mm-hmm.
So really, you really can't really love someone else until you learn to love yourself. How do you learn to love yourself? You learn to love yourself by understanding, at least from my perspective, the three pillars, right, of emotional, physical, and spiritual. I understand those three pillars, and you do that by learning to accept yourself. How do you learn to accept yourself? You learn to accept yourself by working through the feelings and the traumas and the mental capacity and looking at things differently and doing the forgiveness work and like doing all that stuff up front. You learn to really kind of love yourself through the process, right? Because what I realized, bro, interesting. What I realized is, again, it's a bit cliche, but there is some truth to it. There is purpose through the pain.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us, unfortunately, is we want to skirt around it. We want to go around it. We want to blame it. We want to justify it. We want to medicate it. We want to label it. We never. So how do you find the will for your life? How do you find purpose? How do you do that? You have to go through the pain of life. You have to go through it, right?
Mhm.
So it's interesting. Like for me, now I will tell you, I believe in a sovereign God, right? So I believe there's no coincidences. I believe that this is ordained, right? This is sovereign. But I had to go through, just like you had to go through 18 years of being sober, right? You had to go through what you had to go through. Army. I haven't heard your story. I love to hear your story,
Mhm.
but I had to go through what I had to go through. You had to go through what you had to go through, right? The rights and the lefts and the issues and the hurts and the pains and all that stuff to bring us to a place where we kind of know each other at a deeper level,
Mhm.
right? Without really knowing each other, right?
Mhm.
So, but we know each other at a deeper level because that pain in our life, we went through the pain, right? And now there's purpose through that pain, right? You have a sphere of influence that you'll have in your life. I'll touch people in my life that you'll never touch. You'll touch people in your life that I'll never touch. But we have a common thread of pain that we found purpose through.
Yeah.
Everybody wants purpose in life, right? Everybody wants that purpose, but they're busy skirting and going around and labeling and medicating the pain in their life.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, so I have this thing that I try to, I guess, preach to my clients and I try to work with people on, which is chasing failure.
Yeah, yes.
And it has to do with that. It has to do with the fact that you're not going to get to the other side without, like, you're not going to become a better version of yourself without failure. It's
Right.
necessary. It's required. And so
100%.
pain is part of failure.
Yes.
And so the avoidance of it, which is understandable, it is our default mode to avoid these things, but like that's a protective mechanism that we don't need.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
We
Yes.
can lean into these things, into these challenges, into these things that we'd prefer to avoid. And as a result, we become better. So maybe it is cliche in terms of uh, your pain becoming your purpose, but it's happened over and over and over. Why would we doubt it? And like
Right.
that's the story that
Exactly.
we all admire within people as well. You know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I always tell the people, I work with that I don't believe in failure. I believe in feedback.
Mm.
Right. So we're not failing in life. We're presenting options for feedback. Right. That means change. So when you get feedback, you can work through that feedback and make some changes. So, but you have to have that failure to have the feedback. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when you change your perspective of it and you see it from a different perspective, it doesn't nullify the pain. Right. The
Mm-hmm.
pain that comes along with it. It doesn't nullify that. It doesn't justify the pain or the situation that caused it. Right. But you
Yeah.
tend to change your perspective of it and not see it as so much as failure, but as feedback. Right. And that feedback then that gives you the choice to make your adjustments in life, the changes in life that the failure is giving you, is presenting you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the failure is presenting feedback for you to make adjustments and changes. If you tend to not make adjustment and changes, then you're quote unquote choosing, right, to stay addicted to that pain or that failure, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you never really learn. And that, to your point, that's a difficult bridge to cross when a lot of us, have a lot of failure. Right.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of
Yeah.
us do have a lot of failure. I won't deny that. So it's not again, it doesn't justify the pain. It doesn't nullify the experience. But when you look at it that's the challenging of the thinking, right? You feel the pain, you challenge the way you think, and then you kind of change the perspective of it, which then changes the behavior associated with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you grow. That's where growth comes from, right? And too many of us, like you said, too many of us it becomes our default mode, right? Then we just
Mm-hmm.
stop trying, so to say.
Yeah.
Right. Then the dissonance
Yeah.
and distortions kick in.
Yes. So I have so many more questions, but I'll end with this because yeah, we'll just keep going.
Right.
So let's end with this. So and I bring this up because I have I have a client of mine, and so as I was preparing for this today, this kind of came up, and I got a emergency call from my client last night, high suicide ideation.
Okay.
And you
Got
said
it.
in 2011
Yep.
you dealt with this. So what would be for people who are listening? What would be a roadmap for these people that are, they're stuck in self. They're stuck in rumination. They're stuck in catastrophizing, and they're just over and over and over. And for someone like me or you that would see it and be like, dude, like it's right around the corner. You're like,
Right.
you're not that far from your breakthrough.
Yeah.
You're so close. Like just,
Yeah.
don't kill yourself. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
you're right
Right.
there. Like like the person who is kind of in this place of reality where you can kind of see like almost obvious steps that are going to happen next if you begin some of the self-love work and some of the self-care work. It's so hard for a person to be able to see that, who is maybe in that mindset that you were in 2011. So what would be a good practical roadmap? And you can just reiterate some of the stuff you've already said if you want, but what would be a practical roadmap for them to begin working and getting out of that?
Yeah. So what I would say, first of all, is never lose hope, man. Like never become hopeless, right? You can feel helpless, but never allow yourself to become hopeless, right? And there's a difference there. I got to a point of my helplessness turned into hopelessness, right? And that was a dangerous place to be. So that's kind of the first thing, right? Don't, and you do that by not shutting down, right? By doing what your client did. I know it's an emergency call. I know it's 12 o'clock at night. I know you just woke up, right? So, but you have to have the wherewithal inside of you not to become hopeless, because that is a very dangerous place to be. The other element that I found with at least what I was dealing with, and what I have found that I really discovered what I was struggling with at that time. And my struggle was I had an element of guilt and regret. Like I always explain kind of like guilt and regret as being I'm sorry for what I did. Right. So it's kind of self-inflicted, right? I am sorry for what I did, self-inflicted. That guilt and regret, what it did is over time, it combined with shame.
Mm-hmm.
And shame is kind of like, I'm sorry for who I am. Right. And some of it's cultural, some of it is environmental, some of it's relational. Like, so the guilt and regret in my life combined it with the shame. So I'm sorry for what I did, combined with the sorry for who I am. And over time, that became what I call toxic shame. And toxic shame is a place in which you can't stand who you've become. Right. You literally hate yourself. So much so you can't look yourself in the mirror. And I know the feeling of not wanting to exist. I know exactly what that feeling feels like, which is a dangerous place to be, because remember, you act and attract based on what you believe. And so if you start believing I can't stand who I am, or I can't stand who I've become, you tend to start acting that out. Right. So that's where addiction comes from. That's where severe isolation comes from. That's where promiscuity comes from. That's where suicide comes from. Right. So I think from a practitioner perspective, I think for you and I, we have to get to an element of realizing, okay, what some of these people might be dealing with. That's not, obviously there's a physiological response to suicide, that with the ideations, those types of things. So I won't deny that. But the toxic shame in people's lives, I think from a practitioner perspective, is really kind of helping them kind of navigate what has grown to be toxic shame in their life, right? Where I can't stand who I've become. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was really dealing with in my own life, is why I just couldn't stand who I've become. But the roadmap from that is a place of realizing that just because I can't stand who I've become doesn't mean I need to act out and become the person I can't stand who I've become. Right. So that's the challenging of thinking. And to be honest, I think that's where folks like you, right, you come alongside to kind of help guide people through that process. Right. And people know when like just existing has become difficult for them. Right. And most people, I was the individual that, what do you mean? I just saw him yesterday. Like, where'd that come from? Right. It's, some of it's opportunity, right? Some of it's opportunist. But really it's a slow burn, because it becomes this feeling of, I just don't want to exist. Right. Just existing was difficult. So from a roadmap perspective, I think the individual that might be listening to this and hearing this, if you're at that point in life, first of all, get the help that you need, right? Reach out to somebody, get the help that you need, right? That's a must. And I think from a practitioner perspective, if we have practitioners listening to this, we need to realize that ideation or those thoughts or those feelings and those behaviors come from much, much deeper pain, dealing with more likely what I call toxic shame, right? And toxic shame is a very dangerous place to be. So again, from a person that's struggling with that, realizing that you can't allow your helplessness turn into hopelessness, right? That's the first one. Realizing that just because you might have come to a place where you can't stand who you are doesn't mean that you are who you can't stand, right? You can change that about yourself, right? That can change. You can grow from that. You can get yourself out from under this tunnel or this hole that you got yourself in by meeting with and working with the right people, right? That understand that, wait a second, man, we need to heal kind of this toxic shame that we might be dealing with, right? And again, there's elements of, there's a great book by Healing the Shame That Binds You. Have you read John Bradshaw's Healing the Shame That Binds You?
No.
Great book, outrageously good book, especially from a biblical perspective, from a Christian perspective. He's a Christian author. Great book, Healing the Shame That Binds You. And I always encourage people to I have people read two books. It's a great book, if I may, called Whole Again by Jackson McKenzie. Bro, I'm telling you, you have not read a book like this. The book is fascinating, really quite fascinating. I have everybody read that particular book, and then I branch off between Healing the Shame That Binds You, The Body Keeps the Score, right? Those types of books, right? So, but the Whole Again by Jackson McKenzie is an outrageously good book. And I think that's the roadmap, right? Realizing that your hopelessness is not hopelessness, right? Realizing that you can get yourself out from where you're at, right? You just need the tools and techniques and the people that help guide you through that process. Always, always, always reach out.
All right, Ryan, man.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Yeah, man, it was great.
Dude, this is great.
Yeah, bro, it was great. I'm glad we had this time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Patina'd podcast. There are other shows that emphasize resilience, but my intent is to normalize personal development through embracing challenge by interviewing the common man and woman, the person that you and I can relate to. If you are someone who wants to soak up the insights of normal people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe. If you know somebody who is overwhelmed by fear and complacency, please share this podcast with them. I'm your host, Kenny Hill, and I run a private practice near Sacramento, California called Recovery Hill. My website is in the description tab along with my social media links.
Chasing shadows in light, embracing failures, wings take flight.